This is the real reason why Americans want to visit the capital.
Furby, the first gigapet you pet.
Flambeau Plastics Corporation.
Do you remember those 1990s fads? The ones so ridiculous you can't believe we all went along with them? Back then, these trends were everywhere, turning schoolyards and malls into colorful, noisy stages. What were we really chasing when we could not let them go? Beanie Babies were not just toys. They were a full-blown currency in the 1990s. Kids traded them like baseball cards, and adults hoarded them like gold, convinced they would pay for a college education one day. The tags were sacred, always tucked into those little plastic protectors so they would stay mint condition. You could spot the serious collectors because they spoke in hushed tones about retired bears as if they were discussing fine art. Stores could not keep them on shelves. New shipments caused stampedes that made the evening news. And the thing was, it was not just about having them, it was about having the right ones. A rare color, a misprint, or a special edition could turn a regular plush into a mythical jackpot. At school, kids would line them up during lunch, showing off their collections and guarding them like dragons over treasure. Parents rolled their eyes but still hunted down the next release, sometimes driving hours to find one. Then, almost overnight, the market collapsed, and those basement bins full of investments were just bins full of stuffed animals. But for that short window, owning the right Beanie Baby felt like holding the keys to the kingdom. Furbies were adorable until they decided to wake you up at 3 in the morning. Those fuzzy, owl-like creatures looked harmless enough, blinking their big plastic eyes and chattering in a language only they understood. But the magic and the madness was that they learned over time, slowly replacing their nonsense, Furbish words with English phrases. At first, this seemed incredible. Then one would suddenly shout, "Hungry!" in the dead of night, and you would remember you had left it on the shelf across from your bed. Kids swore they would talk even without batteries, and urban legends spread about Furbies recording conversations. Parents banned them from some households. Teachers confiscated them from classrooms. But that only made them more desirable. Every kid wanted one for the bragging rights alone, and stores could not restock them fast enough during the holidays. The sound of their mechanical eyelids opening in a silent room was enough to make your hair stand on end, yet somehow, you still loved them. They were part toy, part pet, and part creepy roommate who never slept. JNCO jeans were less pants and more portable fabric tents. They were wide, really wide, so much so that you could lose entire objects in the folds. The cuffs would drag along the pavement, fraying into long, dirty fringes that could practically mop the floor as you walked. The pockets were so deep you could fit a soda bottle, a Game Boy, and a sandwich all at once. And for a brief, shining moment, this was the height of cool. Skateboarders wore them because they gave the illusion of effortless rebellion, while kids in suburban malls wore them because, well, everyone else was. Parents complained they looked ridiculous, but that only made them more appealing. Every step came with the subtle swish of heavy denim against itself, and if you sat cross-legged, the pant legs would spread out like picnic blankets. Of course, they were completely impractical. Stepping in a puddle meant you were dragging wet denim for the rest of the day. But practicality was never the point. The point was to take up space, to announce your style without saying a word, and to make sure no one could see your shoes. Tamagotchi pet funerals were proof that the 1990s took digital pets way too seriously. The little egg-shaped keychains were supposed to be fun, but they demanded constant feeding, cleaning, and attention. Miss one too many beeps, and your pixelated pet would die, leaving a tiny ghost floating across the screen. For some kids, this was devastating. They would hold actual ceremonies complete with shoebox coffins and heartfelt speeches about what a good virtual creature it had been. Friends would gather around to watch the reset button get pressed, like a rebirth ritual. Some kids swore they could never love another Tamagotchi the same way again, at least until the new color version came out. Schools even banned them because the constant attention they required was distracting entire classrooms. Looking back, it is wild how much emotional energy went into caring for a pixelated blob, but at the time, Those little beeps felt like the most important sound in the world. The Macarena was unavoidable in the 1990s. Weddings, school dances, backyard barbecues, it did not matter where you were, someone would start the song, and suddenly you were lined up doing the same set of moves with everyone else. It was the great equalizer. Shy kids, cool kids, grandparents, everyone knew the routine. The hand motions, the hip wiggles, the final turn, it was burned into collective muscle memory. And the song stuck in your head for days, whether you liked it or not. For months, it felt like you could not go a week without hearing it somewhere, on the radio, in commercials, even as background music in department stores. At first it was fun, then it was overplayed to the point of absurdity, and then, somehow, it was fun again. People laughed at themselves while doing it, which was part of the charm. It was a rare moment when the entire crowd was in on the same joke, and nobody cared how silly they looked. Lisa Frank school supplies were not just colorful, they were a visual explosion. Neon dolphins, rainbow leopards, unicorns surrounded by floating hearts. Her designs turned binders, folders, and pencil cases into works of art. Opening a new Lisa Frank Trapper Keeper on the first day of school was like a public declaration of joy. They were so bright you could spot them across the classroom, and having a matching set was the ultimate power move in elementary school. Even the smell of a brand new Lisa Frank folder became part of the memory, that mix of fresh paper and plastic. You could spend an entire afternoon at the store debating which design felt the most you. For kids, it was a way to make school feel magical. For parents, it was a way to make sure nothing you owned could possibly be misplaced. The designs were unapologetically over the top, dripping with glitter and color combinations that defied logic. Even kids who claimed they were too cool for Lisa Frank secretly admired them. You could not look at one without smiling, and that was exactly the point. Clear plastic electronics were a brief but glorious design trend. Game Boys, cordless phones, even televisions came with see-through casings, letting you peer at all the circuitry inside. It made everything look futuristic and slightly rebellious, like you owned a piece of forbidden tech. Kids would press their noses to the plastic, tracing wires and gears with their eyes, imagining they were engineers. You could spend minutes just turning it over in your hands, looking at the tiny screws and colorful wiring like it was a puzzle. Friends would crowd around whenever someone brought a new clear gadget to school, treating it like a rare collectible. The translucent look made even ordinary devices feel special. Your friend's regular Walkman had nothing on your see-through one. Of course, the novelty wore off eventually, but for a while, owning a clear plastic gadget was a surefire way to get attention. They were a perfect mix of function and fashion, and even today there is something weirdly satisfying about being able to see the inner workings of your favorite toy. Slap bracelets were deceptively simple, just a strip of flexible metal wrapped in colorful fabric. You straightened them out, slapped them against your wrist, and they coiled instantly into place. It was oddly addictive, and once you started, you could not stop. They came in every pattern imaginable: neon stripes, animal prints, holographic sparkles. The louder the snap, the more impressive it felt, especially if you could land it perfectly every time. Some kids even mastered slapping them onto friends' wrists in one smooth motion without warning. The sound of one snapping shut was unmistakable, and soon entire classrooms would be filled with the echo of kids slapping their wrists. Parents worried about the sharp edges underneath the fabric, especially after a few bracelets started to wear out and cut people. Schools banned them, which of course only made them cooler. Everyone wanted the rarest pattern, and trading them at recess became a serious business. The mark they left on your arm was like a badge of honor. You had been slapping all day, and you were not afraid to show it. Butterfly hair clips were tiny, colorful, and absolutely everywhere. Kids would twist little sections of hair and secure them with the plastic butterflies, often layering them up and down the sides of their heads. They came in every shade of the rainbow, sometimes glittery, sometimes pearlescent, and they made your hair look like it had been decorated by a fairy. Wearing them was a full commitment. By the end of the day, some would be slipping out, and you would find them in your backpack, your desk, even on the floor of the bus. Friends would often trade them midday, walking away with an entirely new rainbow pattern in their hair. Getting a fresh pack from the store felt like unlocking a whole new set of outfit combinations. The more you wore at once, the cooler you were, and there was no such thing as too many. They were cheerful, playful, and instantly turned any outfit into something fun. You could not open a locker or a pencil case in the late 1990s without a couple of these spilling out. Overstuffed inflatable furniture looked like it belonged in a cartoon. Brightly colored, made of slick vinyl and often slightly squeaky when you sat down, it was a bedroom status symbol. Chairs, couches, even footstools. If it could be inflated, someone made it. They were perfect for lounging while talking on the phone, playing video games, or reading magazines, but they were also fragile. Pushing one across the room made that hilarious squealing sound that everyone could hear down the hall. And if you had more than one piece in your room, it instantly became the go-to hangout spot for your friends. One sharp pencil or cat claw, and your prized chair was deflated in seconds. They did not last long, but that was part of the charm. You knew you would be replacing it eventually. The smell of the vinyl was oddly comforting, and the way the furniture wobbled under you made everything feel less serious. It was furniture you could flop onto without a second thought, and for a moment, your room felt like your own personal hangout spot from a teen movie. Disposable cameras were like tiny treasure chests of memories, except you had no idea what was inside until weeks or months later. You would take them to birthday parties, vacations, or random afternoons with friends, snapping away without the instant feedback we take for granted now. Every click of the shutter was a gamble. Was it perfectly framed, or was your finger in front of the lens? You would forget about it for a while, tossing the camera into a drawer or backpack, only to find it long after the moments had passed. Sometimes you would remember taking a photo but have no clue how it would turn out, which made picking them up from the store feel like opening a mystery box. That little stack of envelopes behind the counter had the power to transport you back months in a single glance. Then came the ritual of dropping it off at the photo counter and waiting days for the prints. The reveal was half the fun: blurry shots, accidental close-ups, friends mid-blink, and maybe, just maybe, a few pictures that were actually great. It was imperfect, but that imperfection made it exciting. You could not delete anything, so even the bad photos became part of the story. The pile of glossy prints you brought home was like a time capsule, and flipping through them felt like reliving an entirely different life. CD binders packed with burned mix discs were the portable playlists of the 1990s. Before streaming, before MP3 players, you had to physically carry your music with you, and burned CDs were how you showed off your taste. Every disc was labeled in marker, often with dramatic titles like Road Trip Mix or Summer Jams 98. Friends traded them like currency, slipping each other custom mixes in thin jewel cases. Some binders were so full you had to sit on them to zip them closed, making them feel like the musical equivalent of a packed suitcase. Flipping through the pages was like browsing a personal diary, each track list tied to a specific mood or memory. Some were perfectly curated, others had 3 different versions of the same song because you loved it that much. The binder itself was a prized possession, stuffed so full that the zipper strained to close. You could flip through it for hours, remembering when you first heard each song. And there was always the fear of leaving it somewhere, because losing that binder meant losing months, maybe years, of music history. The scratches, the handwritten track lists, the random doodles in the margins, they were all part of the personality. Rollerblading through the neighborhood was more than just a pastime. It was a social event. Kids would strap on their skates, tighten the laces, and head for the smoothest streets they could find. You would meet at a friend's driveway, then roll as a pack, weaving around parked cars and racing each other down hills. The clatter of wheels on pavement was the soundtrack of a summer afternoon. Every turn felt like a test of balance and bravery, and nailing a perfect stop without crashing was its own kind of victory. The group rides often turned into mini-adventures, with new routes discovered and claimed like secret shortcuts. Some kids could spin, jump, or skate backwards, showing off skills that looked like magic to everyone else. Others were just trying not to crash into a mailbox. You learned the best shortcuts, which driveways had the steepest slopes, and where to avoid because of that one neighbor who yelled at everyone. Scraped knees were part of the deal, but you wore them proudly as proof you had been out there. And when the sun started setting, you would skate home, legs sore, hands sticky from gas station sodas, already planning the next day's ride. Pagers for kids who had no one to page them were a strange badge of cool. You clipped it to your waistband or stuck it in your pocket, feeling like a secret agent even if it never buzzed. Parents said it was for emergencies, but really, it was for show. You would casually check it in public, pretending to read a message that was not there. Some kids would send themselves test pages just to make it look like they were in demand. The little beep or vibration was enough to spark curiosity from anyone nearby, which was half the appeal. Friends would page each other with codes, numbers that spelled words when flipped upside down, or the all-important 911 to mean, "Call me now." The irony was that you often had to find a payphone to actually return the call. Having a pager made you feel important, like you were in demand, even if the only person paging you was your mom. And when it finally did go off for real, you made sure everyone around you noticed. Frosted tips and spiky hair gel overload turned entire middle schools into a sea of stiff, crunchy hairstyles. You would scoop a glob of gel into your hands, spike your hair skyward, and maybe add a streak of bleach to the front for maximum effect. It was sharp enough to survive a windstorm, thanks to an entire bottle of product. Boys copied boy band members. Girls experimented with frosted strands pulled into tiny spikes. A good hair day meant your style stayed frozen in place from morning to night without a single spike drooping. The downside was finding pillow dents still visible in your hair the next morning if you forgot to wash it out. Showers could not wash it out in one go. You had to fight your way through it with shampoo, sometimes twice. The smell of hair gel was everywhere. Locker rooms, bus rides, even classrooms. In photos from that era, the hair is almost a character of its own, shiny, structured, and somehow defying gravity. It was a look that said, "I care about my appearance," while also saying, "I have not yet learned subtlety." Mini backpacks as actual purses were a 1990s fashion paradox. Tiny, but somehow essential. They came in vinyl, denim, and fake leather, often in colors no one would dare wear today. You could barely fit a wallet, a lip gloss, and maybe a flip phone inside, but that was not the point. The point was that it looked cute slung over one shoulder, straps hanging loose. Opening one up always felt like rummaging through a secret stash, even if there were only 3 items inside. Some people personalized them with keychains or pins, turning each bag into a mini statement piece. Friends would swap them for a day just to see what it was like to carry a different look. The zippers had a distinctive sound, like you were about to reveal something important. And despite their size, they always seemed to produce exactly what someone asked for, as if they had their own kind of magic. Celebrities wore them, teen magazines promoted them, and suddenly every mall store had a wall full of them. They matched platform sandals, pleather pants, and every other loud style of the time. Owning one was a way of signaling that you were in on the trend, even if it was wildly impractical. And yet, somehow, that little backpack always seemed to carry exactly what you needed. Nothing more, nothing less. Gak and other weird Nickelodeon slimes were equal parts toy and mess. Packaged in bright containers shaped like splats or barrels, they oozed out in a slow, satisfying stretch. Kids would squeeze it, squish it, and make gross noises by pushing it into cups or through their fingers. The smell was strangely chemical, yet addictive. It had a strange, cold feeling in your hands, like it came straight from a fridge, even if it had been sitting on your desk all day. Some kids would hide tiny toys inside just to pull them out like buried treasure. Others tried stretching it across a room to see how far it would go before snapping. And there was always that one daredevil who would drop it on their head for laughs. Even after the novelty wore off, finding an old tub of Gak brought back every messy, giggling memory. Nickelodeon commercials showed slime pouring from the sky onto celebrities, and every kid wanted to recreate it at home. It stuck to carpet, hair, and clothes, but that did not stop anyone from bringing it into classrooms or on car rides. Parents hated it, teachers banned it, but that only fueled the obsession. Having slime meant you were ready for a good time, even if it meant scrubbing it off your hands for hours afterward. Koosh balls in every classroom were like the unofficial stress toy of the 1990s. Made of hundreds of soft, rubbery strands, they were perfect for tossing back and forth without causing much damage. Teachers would sometimes use them for games or icebreakers, but mostly they lived on desks and got passed around during downtime. The gentle thwip sound they made when you caught one was oddly satisfying. They were easy to grip, which made them perfect for kids who struggled with throwing a regular ball. Some students would collect them in different colors, swapping at recess like they were trading cards. Others would spin them by a single strand, watching the rubbery threads blur into a colorful halo. If one strand snapped off, it almost felt like a badge of honor, proof of serious use. And nothing got a room laughing faster than a koosh ball accidentally bouncing off someone's head. They came in bright colors, and the more worn in they were, the better they felt in your hand. Kids would absent-mindedly pull at the strands, knot them together, or see how far they could stretch without breaking. They were harmless enough until someone inevitably threw one at the ceiling and it got stuck. Even then, that was just part of their charm. They were toys you could fidget with endlessly, and nobody minded. Yomega yo-yo tricks at recess turned playgrounds into mini talent shows. These were not your average drugstore yo-yos. Yomega models had ball bearings that made tricks smoother and spins longer. Suddenly, Walk the Dog and Around the World were just warm-ups for more elaborate stunts. Kids practiced Rock the Baby, Eiffel Tower, and endless variations they had seen in instruction booklets or on VHS tapes. Some even made up their own signature tricks and gave them dramatic names, hoping they would catch on. The best players kept their strings perfectly clean and adjusted for the exact right length. There was a certain pride in being able to snap the yo-yo back into your hand without looking. And if your yo-yo glowed in the dark or lit up, you instantly had an audience after the sun went down. The competition could get intense, but it was always mixed with laughter and applause. Owning a Yomega meant you were serious about yo-yos and showing up at recess with one guaranteed an audience. Sometimes they would get tangled, smacked into the pavement, or snap back too hard and hit your knuckles. But that was part of the learning curve. The best players could make it look effortless, the yo-yo spinning in midair like it was alive. For a few years, nothing was cooler than mastering a trick and having the whole playground cheer. Snapple real facts under the cap were like tiny prizes hidden in plain sight. Every time you twisted open a bottle, you got a random fact printed on the inside of the cap. Something quirky, unbelievable, or oddly specific. Sharks can live up to 100 years. The average human blinks 25 times a minute. You never knew if it was true or not, but you repeated it to your friends anyway. Some people built entire trivia collections out of these caps, storing them in jars or photo albums. Others would challenge friends to see who could find the weirdest fact. There was a small thrill in twisting the cap slowly, just to make the reveal more dramatic. And if you found a duplicate fact, it felt oddly disappointing, like opening a pack of cards and getting the same one you already had. Whether you believed the fact or not, it instantly became conversation material. People collected their favorite caps, lining them up on windowsills or pinning them to corkboards. The facts gave you something to talk about during lunch, and sometimes they even led to heated debates. It was a small thing, but it made drinking Snapple feel like a 2-for-1 deal. Tasty beverage, plus a piece of trivia you could share with anyone willing to listen. Puka shell necklaces were the unofficial badge of someone who had been to the beach or wanted everyone to think they had. In the 1990s, they were everywhere, from surf shops to mall kiosks, strung on elastic or cord in simple white or mixed with colorful beads. They gave off an instant laid-back, I just stepped off the boardwalk vibe, even if you live nowhere near an ocean. Kids wore them with oversized t-shirts, cargo shorts, or their favorite windbreakers, thinking they looked effortlessly cool. The truth was, they were not exactly comfortable. The shells could be scratchy, and if you wore them in the shower, they smelled faintly like wet sand. But that did not matter. Puka shells were about the image. They were a ticket into a certain aesthetic, a shortcut to saying, I'm chill, I'm outdoorsy, I'm maybe a surfer in spirit. Some kids never took theirs off, wearing them to school, the pool, even in their yearbook photos. You could buy them for a few dollars, which meant they were an easy gift between friends or a spur-of-the-moment purchase at a boardwalk stand. And just like that, your personality included owns a Puka shell necklace. Looking back, it was such a simple accessory, but in the 1990s, it was a piece of jewelry that made you feel like you belonged to an unspoken club of kids who looked like they should be in a beach commercial, whether or not they had ever touched a surfboard. Glow-in-the-dark stars on bedroom ceilings turned every kid's room into a personal planetarium. Sold in little plastic jars or cardboard packs, these tiny plastic shapes stuck to the ceiling with adhesive putty. In daylight, they looked like pale yellow blobs, but at night, they came alive, glowing faint green in familiar constellations, or in whatever random pattern you slapped them up in. Parents tolerated them because they were cheap and easy to apply, and kids loved the way they made bedtime feel magical. The ritual was simple. Turn off the lights, lie back in bed, and watch the fake stars slowly fade as you drifted off. Sometimes you would rearrange them into your own designs, or add planets, moons, and even the occasional comet for extra flair. Over time, the glow would weaken, so you would recharge them by blasting the ceiling with a flashlight or just leaving the lights on before bed. They had a faint smell of the adhesive putty which stuck under your fingernails if you ever tried to peel them off. And there was always that one star you could never quite get down, still clinging to the ceiling years later like a relic of childhood. Glow-in-the-dark stars were a low-tech, low-cost way of giving every kid a sense of wonder before falling asleep. In a time before smartphones and streaming, those glowing dots were entertainment, decoration, and comfort all in one. Chain wallets for kids who had nothing to lose were peak 1990s tough guy fashion. The premise was simple. Attach your wallet to your pants with a chain so no one could steal it. In reality, most kids had maybe $5 and a school ID in there, but that was beside the point. The chain was the star. It swung dramatically when you walked, clinked when you sat down, and caught the light in a way that made you feel dangerous. Skaters wore them, punk kids wore them, and eventually, kids who had never stepped on a skateboard started wearing them too. Sometimes the chain was short and practical. Other times it was so long it looped dramatically from front to back pocket. The wallet itself was usually made of Velcro or worn leather, holding a few coins, a library card, and maybe a movie ticket stub. Parents rolled their eyes, teachers complained about them scratching desks, and they were banned from some schools for safety reasons. But banning them only made them cooler. The chain wallet was less about securing your valuables and more about securing your identity. It told the world you had a little edge, even if your idea of rebellion was just staying out past curfew. Desktop dancing baby animation was one of the earliest viral sensations, and it was everywhere in the late 1990s. This strange, slightly unsettling 3D animation of a diapered baby doing a looping dance somehow became office entertainment, internet humor, and pop culture all rolled into one. The graphics were primitive by today's standards, chunky limbs, glassy eyes, jerky movements, but back then they were mind-blowing. You might first see it in an email forward from a coworker or as a screensaver on someone's bulky desktop computer. It even popped up on television, cementing its place as a bizarre yet beloved relic of early digital culture. The appeal was hard to explain. It was funny, it was weird, and it was new. People would gather around one computer to watch it over and over, laughing at how absurd it was. The dancing baby was proof that the internet could spread something to millions without any real purpose or explanation. And for a brief, glorious time, it was a must-see attraction in offices, classrooms, and anyone's home who had the right software. No fear shirts with extreme life advice were the uniform for kids who wanted to project confidence, even if they were still figuring it out. These oversized t-shirts featured bold block lettering and aggressive slogans like "Second place is the first loser" or "If you are not living on the edge, you are taking up too much space." They were part motivational speech, part sports hype, and part intimidation tactic. Wearing one made you feel like you were stepping onto a stage where you had to back up your words with action. whether that meant landing a skateboard trick, winning at recess football, or just striding down the hall like you owned it. The shirts were often paired with baggy shorts, baseball caps turned backwards, and a healthy dose of attitude. They were sold in mall stores alongside skate gear and energy drink promotions, further cementing their place in 1990s extreme culture. The messages were over the top, sometimes ridiculous, but they gave kids a way to announce themselves without saying a word. And while most of us were just wearing them because they looked cool, at the time it felt like we were wearing armor, a bold statement in cotton form, daring the world to challenge us. Pop Swatch watches were big, bright, and looked like they came from a cartoon, because in the 1980s that was a compliment. These were not your parents' watches. They had huge faces, crazy colors, and sometimes even plastic attachments like rubber guards or transparent frames. You wore one, maybe two. Some kids stacked them like bracelets. Telling time was secondary. Looking cool? That was the goal. You wanted your wrist to say something about who you were, that you liked color, that you liked fun, that you were not afraid to clash. Pop Swatches came in every wild design imaginable: leopard print, neon splatter, transparent green. They were as much toy as timepiece, and they screamed 1980s from a mile away. If your watch matched your jelly shoes or your fanny pack, you were doing it right. They clicked and clacked and sometimes fogged up from sweat, but no one cared. You checked the time just to show it off, and when your Pop Swatch broke, you wore it anyway. Pantsuits in the 1970s were the answer to every occasion. Church? Pantsuit. Job interview? Pantsuit. Backyard barbecue with Aunt Marlene and 3 uninvited neighbors? Pantsuit. It was the era of women dressing for power and comfort at the same time, in matching jacket and slacks, all made of polyester that could stop a bullet and hold a wrinkle for decades. The fabric was always a little too shiny, the colors were bold enough to blind someone across the room, and the lapels, huge. You could land a small plane on them. Buttons were oversized, shoulder pads mandatory, and sometimes they had pockets, but not enough to hold anything except a peppermint and a tissue. These suits came in every hue: avocado green, rust orange, baby blue. It was like someone melted a crayon box onto a sewing machine. But you wore it with pride. Women strode into offices, classrooms, and PTA meetings looking like they meant business and maybe disco after. Some even wore turtlenecks underneath, because nothing says "I am ready for my moment" like a snug polyester turtleneck under a double-breasted blazer in egg yolk yellow. They were hot, literally, but style meant sacrifice. People thought these suits were the height of fashion, and maybe they were, until you tried to sit down and realized you were now permanently bonded to a plastic chair. You have not truly suffered until your bare leg touched a metal slide in the middle of July. Playgrounds in the 1970s were built like industrial accident zones. Solid metal swings, monkey bars that doubled as ladder traps, and seesaws that launched unsuspecting kids into orbit. Safety padding? Never heard of it. Shade? Only if you brought your own umbrella. And the slide? That was a solar panel in disguise. Kids lined up to willingly roast themselves for 5 seconds of scorching fun. The jungle gyms burned your palms. The merry-go-round gave you motion sickness and a concussion. But nobody complained. This was how you built character and calluses. Parents sat nearby, fanning themselves with newspapers while you baked like a pizza on aluminum foil. If you cried, they handed you a hose. It was simple. Toughen up or try the sandbox, also known as the neighborhood litter box. Still, every recess, we ran to it, because that was our battlefield. Metal playgrounds separated the brave from the blistered, and if you could do the monkey bars without screaming once, you were a legend. You might remember Ronald McDonald, but in the 1970s, he wasn't running the show alone. He had help, or maybe company, from a cast of characters so bizarre, so cartoonishly surreal, they felt like they belonged in a Salvador Dali painting directed by Jim Henson. Mayor McCheese with his oversized cheeseburger head and mayoral sash. Grimace, a purple blob with no clear origin or purpose who might have been a milkshake or a living gumdrop, and the Hamburglar, a masked menace in a striped outfit who only ever said "robble robble." These weren't just mascots, they were marketing fever dreams brought to life. And kids loved them. They weren't realistic, they weren't logical, but they were unforgettable. They appeared in commercials, Happy Meal toys, playgrounds, and birthday parties. The McDonald's Land Gang was a kind of fast food mythology, a goofy, unsettling, brightly colored world where French fries grew on trees and hamburgers needed political representation. It was weird, but it worked. It worked so well that entire generations grew up thinking Grimace was their friend and the Hamburglar was a hilarious criminal. The funny part? No one ever questioned it. You just accepted that your cheeseburger came with a side of mayors and purple monsters. And somehow, that made it taste better. In a world full of rules and rationing, McDonald's Land was a lawless place where ketchup was currency and imagination was king. Television Guide was the original streaming schedule, printed, folded, and worshipped. Each week, families flipped through its pages to plan their entire viewing life. What time is your show on? What channel is the big movie airing? Without a television guide, you were lost in the static. It listed every program, from early morning cartoons to late-night reruns. You circled shows in pen. You memorized time slots. You argued with siblings over what to watch and when. Sometimes you even set a timer on the VCR to record your favorites, if you could figure out how. Television Guide came with featured articles, behind-the-scenes trivia, and occasionally a glossy cover that made you feel like you were holding something special. It was not just a magazine, it was a map, a lifeline, and a reminder that missing your show meant waiting until summer reruns or, gasp, never seeing it again. Kids today will never understand the pressure of being ready at exactly 7 o'clock, or the heartbreak of flipping the page and realizing your favorite show was preempted by a holiday parade. The television guide was small, simple, and essential, and in a world before scrolling, it helped us find our way through the glow of the living room screen. Generic brand groceries were the quiet label of struggle in the 1980s. Walk into any store and you would see those plain white boxes with nothing but bold black lettering, cornflakes, macaroni, or just soup. No mascots, no cartoons, no sparkle. They sat on the bottom shelf like they were trying not to be noticed. But they were. Everyone saw them. Kids knew what they meant. If those showed up in your cart, you were not getting prizes in your cereal. You were just getting food. Some tasted okay. Some tasted like cardboard. But they filled the pantry. And that was the point. They were cheaper by quarters that mattered. Some families would peel off the labels just so the box did not scream. Others embraced them, one no-name can at a time. In school lunches, you hoped no one saw the off-brand cookies. You ate them fast, hoping they passed for the real thing. Generic brand groceries were not glamorous. They were not meant to be. But they were the invisible badge of getting by. And for the families that counted every dollar, those blank white labels were a quiet promise. You were doing what you could, and you were not alone. No toys? No problem. Just give a poor kid some cardboard tubes, a roll of tape, and maybe some crayons, and watch the imagination take off. 1 minute it was a telescope. The next it was a lightsaber. With enough glue, it became an action figure, a spaceship, or a castle tower. If you were lucky, you had construction paper. If not, you just peeled labels off cans and used that. Every cardboard tube became a character, a weapon, or a part of something bigger. You made puppets with googly eyes drawn in marker, or you taped two together and made binoculars. Fully functional, if your definition of functional was extremely flexible. Friends brought over their store-bought toys. You brought out your homemade tank, made from paper towel rolls and bottle caps. And honestly, yours were cooler. They were yours. Original. One of a kind. You learned early that imagination could build anything, and budget had nothing to do with it. Today, kids have 3D printers. We had cardboard tubes and dreams, and you know what? We made it work. Trapper Keepers were not just school supplies. They were personality statements wrapped in loud Velcro and wild colors. You picked your design carefully. Neon shapes, galloping horses, lightning bolts, or abstract geometry that looked like a Miami Vice fever dream. These were not regular binders. They had flaps, pockets, built-in folders with tabs that snapped shut in a way that made you feel in control of something, anything. And that Velcro? Loudest thing in the classroom. RIIIP. You could hear it across the room. Every student had that moment where they opened it slowly, trying not to draw attention. It never worked. The sound was basically a fire alarm, but Trapper Keepers made you feel organized, even when you were not. Loose leaf paper finally had a home. Your homework lived somewhere besides the bottom of your backpack. And best of all, you could decorate them with stickers, doodles, or secret notes to yourself. Trapper Keepers were peak 1980s academic swagger, just enough function to keep you passing, but flashy enough to make you feel like a star. Mood wall posters in the 1970s were the emotional support animals of teenage bedrooms. You were not a real teenager unless your wall screamed something deep like, "Hang in there," with a cat barely clinging to a rope. Sunsets, unicorns, space scenes with glowing planets. These posters were basically printed therapy sessions with glitter. Some had waterfalls and phrases like, "Today is the first day of the rest of your life," as if that was going to help you survive algebra. They were mass-produced, cheaply laminated, and sold in bins next to lava lamps and incense. You could find them rolled up at the back of a Spencer's Gifts, or proudly hung above a beanbag chair. The messages were always vague but intense. You were 13 years old, had not paid a bill in your life, but you needed a poster to remind you to keep on truckin'. And somehow, you did. These posters were both soothing and confusing. Was the crying dolphin supposed to symbolize your soul? Probably not. But it felt like it. Everyone had one, or 5. You hung them with thumbtacks, maybe framed them if you were fancy. They faded in the sun but never lost their drama. It was visual self-help before self-help became a genre. Walk into any 1970s photo album and you will see it. Entire families dressed like living room furniture. We are talking head-to-toe velour, crushed velvet jumpsuits, blinding floral shirts, and patterns that could give you motion sickness. It was not enough for your couch to be orange and brown plaid. You had to match it. You had to become it. Everyone looked like wallpaper came to life. Polyester ruled the kingdom. It was shiny, unbreathable, and made weird squeaking sounds when you moved too fast. But it stretched, and it matched your shag carpet. Some shirts had collars so big they could pick up radio signals. Pants were flared so wide you could parachute out of them. And everything had a pattern. Zigzags, swirls, paisley, sunbursts, flowers the size of dinner plates. If you wore stripes on top and checks on the bottom, that was not clashing. It was called making a statement. Even kids were not safe. You wore corduroy overalls in avocado green and turtlenecks that made your neck feel like it was in witness protection. And do not even get started on accessories. Huge belt buckles, tinted sunglasses, feathered hair. Looking back, it seems impossible that we all walked around like that. But in the moment, it was fabulous. It was groovy, and it was proudly, gloriously couchcore. That little yellow smile was everywhere, on buttons, bumper stickers, t-shirts, notebooks. It told you to have a nice day, like it actually meant it. And in the weird, wonderful chaos of the 1970s, people needed that message more than ever. The smiley face wasn't just a graphic, it was a lifeline. A gentle rebellion against cynicism. A neon-colored handshake that said, "We're gonna be okay." You'd see it at gas stations, on lunchboxes, on pins stuck to shaggy denim jackets. Even if you didn't believe it, you wanted to. That face was a bright yellow lie we all agreed to live inside. It was corny. It was sincere. It was perfect. It made you feel like someone, somewhere still had hope. And maybe that meant you could too. The funny thing? It worked. That dumb little face made people smile back. In an age of protest, polyester, and disco, the smiley face was the simplest joy. And sometimes, that's all we needed. Television antenna adjustments were part of the evening routine, just like brushing your teeth or fighting over the remote. Before streaming, before digital signals, there were rabbit ears. two shiny rods that stood on top of the television like alien feelers. Getting a clear picture meant twisting them in random directions, adjusting one while the other stayed stubbornly out of reach. Sometimes you needed to stand on one foot. Sometimes the only way to get the signal was to hold the antenna yourself and stay there, frozen, arm extended, human satellite. Someone from the couch would yell, "Right there! Do not move!" and you would stay stuck in position, sacrificing comfort for clarity. Foil was added for better reception. Coat hangers became tools of innovation. And if the weather was bad, good luck. The static would return like an uninvited guest. It was frustrating, yes, but it was also communal. Families worked together to solve the mystery of the fuzzy screen. You cheered when the picture came in. You groaned when it disappeared mid-show. Antenna adjustments were the dance of analog television. Awkward, unpredictable, and always a little magical when they actually worked. You opened a garbage bag full of clothes that smelled like attic and disappointment, and that was back-to-school shopping. The sizes were wrong, the styles were weird, and the colors? Questionable. But your mom said, "They are perfectly good." You learned how to hem pants with safety pins. You figured out how to stretch a too small t-shirt just enough to breathe in it. And those vintage pieces? They were not cool yet. They were just old. But you wore them like armor because saying thank you was part of the deal. If someone teased you, you said, "At least I've got clothes," even when it stung. You wore jeans with patches on patches, shirts with names that were not yours, and sweaters that screamed 1974. If the sleeves were too long, you rolled them. If the pants were too short, you wore taller socks. Every kid had that one shirt they hated, but had to wear because it was still in good shape. Yours probably had a cartoon character you had never heard of. You got teased, but you just shrugged. Because clothes were clothes, and you had bigger things to worry about, like making sure your off-brand sneakers did not fall apart by recess. Fashion was optional. Warmth was not. You made it work. Pencil toppers in the 1980s served one purpose. Absolutely none. These were little rubber monsters, fuzzy balls with googly eyes, or glittery puff creatures that balanced awkwardly on the top of your number 2 pencil. Did they help you write? Nope. Did they make your pencil too heavy to function? Almost always. But they made you feel like your homework had style. Everyone had their own little collection. You could twist them off and trade them during recess. You could pop them onto the end of a pen and watch them jiggle during spelling tests. Sometimes they would fall off and roll under desks, causing full-scale classroom disruption. Teachers sighed. Parents rolled their eyes. But we adored them. Pencil toppers gave personality to the most boring part of school. You could have a dragon, a smiley face, or even a tiny disco ball dancing at the top of your notes. They served no real purpose, and maybe that was the point. In a decade obsessed with flair, even pencils needed accessories. Bio-rhythm charts were like astrology's math-loving cousin. You plotted your emotional, intellectual, and physical highs and lows across a wavy graph that looked like a lie detector. People kept track like it mattered. "I cannot take the test today. My chart says I am at a mental low." That was a real excuse. It showed up in magazines, lunchroom conversations, and even some office break rooms. You just needed your birth date and a little time with a pencil. The results looked scientific. The meaning? Questionable. But the belief was real. Some couples blamed biorhythm clashes for breakups. Athletes checked their peaks before big games. It was part science fiction, part calendar, and part mood ring in paper form. People swore by it, until they did not. But while it lasted, you tracked your chart like it could tell your future. There was no talent too small or too strange for the Gong Show. In fact, the stranger, the better. This 1970s game show was like a variety act mixed with a fever dream. People got on national television to perform nose flute solos, tap dance in gorilla costumes, or juggle rubber chickens while yodeling. And somehow, that was the point. The show thrived on chaos. A panel of half-smirking celebrity judges sat ready to hit a giant gong if your act was truly unbearable, which happened a lot. But that did not stop people from trying. Contestants signed up to do synchronized kazoo routines or belly dance while reciting math facts. The host, Chuck Barris, was part ringmaster, part wild-eyed uncle at a wedding. He would laugh, dance, shout nonsense, and cheer on the madness like it was Shakespeare. And the best part? The audience loved it. They clapped, screamed, booed, and occasionally danced in the aisles. Winners got a tiny check, maybe a hug, and eternal bragging rights that they were not gonged. The losers? Honestly, most of them did not care. Just getting 5 minutes to dress like a banana and sing about algebra was enough. It was silly, it was confusing, and it was pure, unfiltered 1970s television, the kind of chaos you just do not get anymore. Show and tell felt like technology from another planet, and if you were a kid in the 1970s, it basically was. A boxy contraption with the soul of a film projector and the heart of a storybook, it let you do something incredible. Watch a movie while listening to a record, all in your very own living room. You didn't need a teacher, you didn't need a classroom, you just needed one of those magical little cartridges, half plastic, half mystery, and the willingness to sit still. It would whir to life with a soft hum, the narrator's voice crackling through the speakers, and as the images scrolled across the tiny screen, it felt like the future. 1 minute you were listening to fairy tales, and the next you were exploring outer space or solving mysteries with a cartoon detective. It was hands-on. It was immersive. It was mesmerizing. Sure, the film sometimes jammed, and yes, the sound occasionally skipped, but who cared? The show and tell turned dull afternoons into cinematic adventures. It made learning feel like fun before anyone thought to market learning as fun. The funny thing is, it was clunky, primitive. But back then, it was everything. A personal theater, powered by your own tiny hands and imagination. Rubik's Cubes sat on coffee tables like miniature monuments to frustration. Their colorful sides promised fun, but more often delivered rage. You twisted, you turned, you thought you had it, and then disaster. One wrong move sent you back to square one. Solving it became a badge of honor. If someone at school could actually complete a Rubik's Cube, they were treated like a genius. Crowds gathered, applause broke out, but most of us faked it. We peeled off the stickers and rearranged them to make it look solved, or we popped out the pieces and snapped them back into place. Technically cheating? Maybe. Spiritually rewarding? Absolutely. There were books, guides, even videos explaining how to beat the cube, but few had the patience. And yet, we all kept trying. Rubik's Cubes lived in junk drawers, backpacks, and classroom desks. They were part toy, part puzzle, part stress test. Looking back, they were frustrating, addictive, and completely iconic. And to this day, if you spot one on a shelf, your hands remember the rhythm of twist, turn, twist, even if your brain still has no idea how to actually solve it. It was the original shortcut for busy kitchens, long before microwaves or DoorDash deliveries. Right there in the wall, usually between the kitchen and dining room, was a little opening known as a pass-through window. Not big enough to walk through, just big enough to pass a steaming pot of mashed potatoes or a stack of plates. It was part convenience, part conversation starter, and part dinner-time drama stage. You could poke your head through and call out, "Who wants seconds?" Or you could slide a dish over without juggling it across the carpet. In bigger homes, they were framed out in wood or tile with little ledges to rest a casserole on. In smaller homes, they were purely functional, a hole in the wall that saved mom 10 steps at every meal. Some even had shutters or swinging doors, so you could close the kitchen once dinner was served. But eventually, open-concept living took over. People tore down the wall entirely instead of carving a window into it. And just like that, the pass-through became passé. Still, it had its charm. It turned dinner into a kind of performance. But if passing potatoes through a hole in the wall sounds odd, imagine burning your garbage in a machine tucked right next to the toilet. Forget rabbit ears, you had coat hangers. Reception in the 1980s was not about technology. It was about physics, patience and standing on one foot while holding a wire hanger at a 17-degree angle near the television. You would twist it, bend it, jam it into the back of the TV, and suddenly, perfect picture. Until you moved. Then it was back to static and blurry game shows. Someone in the family always claimed to be the antenna whisperer. That meant you held the hanger while everyone else watched. If you let go, the screen fuzzed over, and you became the villain of the household. Some hangers were wrapped in foil like space-age art projects. Others had split ends from being fine-tuned with pliers. You tried balancing it on books, soda cans, even your little brother's head, anything to avoid touching it yourself. Every channel had its own sweet spot, and finding it was like unlocking a combination lock you did not know you had. Your only reward? Maybe catching half an episode of Knight Rider before someone walked in front of the screen and ruined everything. Today, people complain if their Wi-Fi dips for 2 seconds. But back then, we fought gravity and metal to watch cartoons. And honestly, that fuzzy, half-clear picture, it still felt like magic. Wacky wall walkers were tiny rubber aliens that came free in cereal boxes and somehow became national treasures. You would toss them against the wall and watch them walk their way down, flipping and sticking with each slow-motion step like they had minds of their own. They made no sense. They had no backstory. But they were hypnotizing. These little neon creatures were made of sticky, stretchy plastic that collected dirt faster than a lint roller at a dog park. After a day or two, they stopped sticking. After a week, they were black with mystery fuzz. But those first few flips? Pure magic. You would race them down the fridge. Challenge your friends to see whose wall walker made it furthest before falling off. Some kids got creative, trying them on windows, ceilings, lockers. One even ended up on the teacher's back once. She was not amused. Wacky wall walkers were the kind of toy that lasted just long enough to feel legendary. No batteries, no instructions. Just throw, watch, repeat. Waterbeds were supposed to be the future of sleep, and maybe they were, if you liked sleeping in a tidal wave. The pitch was seductive. A mattress filled with water that would contour perfectly to your body, like floating on a cloud made of dreams. The reality? Slosh, sway, backache, leak. You got in and the bed kept moving. You rolled over, and so did the other person, usually at you or off the side. Every waterbed had that soft vinyl smell, like a pool toy got promoted. They were impossible to move, nearly impossible to fill, and entirely possible to explode. Some came with heaters, because cold water plus pajamas equals instant regret. But if you were a couple in the 1970s, chances are you owned one, and you defended it like it was a third member of the relationship. It was not just a bed. It was a vibe. That slow roll when you sat down, the bloop of the waves shifting under your blanket. People thought it was sexy. And maybe it was, until 3 a.m., when the seam popped and your bedroom turned into a shallow pond. Saturday mornings in the 1970s were sacred. You rolled out of bed in your pajamas, poured a bowl of sugary cereal the size of your head, and plopped in front of the television like it was your job. But here is the weird part. The cartoons laughed at themselves. Literally. Some genius decided cartoons needed laugh tracks. As if Scooby-Doo could not speak for himself, a crowd of invisible studio strangers would burst out laughing every time someone slipped on a banana peel. Even when it was not funny, especially when it was not funny, the laughs kept coming. It was like the cartoons were trying to convince you something hilarious had just happened. You were 6 years old, confused, and wondering why a ghost tripping over a trash can deserved a full round of applause. But it became background noise like the hum of a refrigerator or the jingle of toy commercials every 5 minutes. Every cartoon from the Flintstones to the Jetsons to those strange Sid and Marty Krofft live-action hybrids used it. Even the characters seemed unsure of what was going on. But it did not matter. You were hypnotized. The colors, the voices, the canned laughter, it all became one joyful blur. It was predictable, comforting, and just weird enough to feel magical. Besides, if the TV was laughing, that meant it had to be funny. Right? Speaking of things built right into the house, You are not going to believe what kind of doors were hiding inside the walls. For your milk. Picture this. You wake up, walk to the side of your kitchen, and open a tiny little door built right into your house. Behind it, a bottle of fresh milk, cool and ready to pour, maybe even some butter or cream depending on the day. No, it is not magic. That was the milk door, also called a milk chute. These small pass-through compartments were genius in their simplicity. One side opened from the outside, where the milkman would quietly place the day's delivery. The other opened from inside the house, so you never had to go out in your slippers or bathrobe. It was the drive-through window before there were drive-thrus. These doors were more than convenient. They were a sign that the world once ran on a shared rhythm. Everyone knew when the milkman came by. You could even leave payments or notes inside. Some had little shelves, others had insulation. And most people never locked them, because who would steal milk? Of course, once grocery stores and home refrigeration became widespread, the milk door quietly disappeared, sealed up, painted over, or just forgotten. But somewhere out there, behind layers of drywall, a few still exist. Hidden time capsules. So which of these wild 1990s fads would you bring back for one more round? Drop your pick in the comments, hit like if you laughed at the memories, and subscribe so you do not miss the next trip through our shared nostalgia.